Hello and welcome to the studio. Well, this week I'm not doing a whole painting for you, but this week I'm doing Q&A. That's right, I asked you if you had questions for me, and I would do my best to look intelligent and even come up with some answers. Now, to try and pull things together in a bit more of a sensible way, I've grouped questions together that relate to oil painting, questions about acrylics, and other sort of loose ends in another section. The first question I often get asked is, can I use acrylics to do the same paintings? So not using oils at all? And the answer to that is yes. In fact, I used the same Bob Ross technique to do this little train scene. It's all done in acrylics, but there are some drawbacks to it, particularly when it comes to blending skies. You see, there isn't much in the way of blending on this. It's all underpainting with foliage, so I didn't rely on a very wet surface to paint. But if you're doing a big sky scene, you might struggle with acrylics which dry very quickly. Now, you can use products called retarders to slow the drying time, and that increases the workability that you have with acrylics. But of course, that will only give you just a few moments more to work on your paintings. And this is one of the big advantages of using oils, is that you can stand back and think about things, go back and rub things out and repair things. Now, there is a crossover because in the last few years, water mixable oils have become quite popular. The advantage of those is that it's still an oil paint, but of course you don't have to use a solvent. But of course, unlike an acrylic, it stayed wet for a long time. So it's maybe not so helpful if you're wanting to sort of work in a confined area and then just be able to put everything away quickly. Then acrylics is king. But there is another variation coming along as well, and that's re-wettable acrylics. A company in Australia called Atelier have been making a range of paints, and I've got some to test. So that'll be in a future video. So this question relates to the use of acrylics and oils on the same painting. Now, this little painting I did recently, and it uses both acrylics and oils. All of the background was done in acrylic. So in other words, all of this in here, all the dark background areas, was done using a piece of sponge. It was all then left to dry before I started working in oils. Once again, there wasn't much sky here. I didn't need to do any blending. I just used the grey of the original canvas. Now, the advantages of doing this is that firstly, my background could dry nice and quickly, and it meant that then I could work in oils on top straight away. I know a lot of you asked, why do acrylics? Why not just use oils for all of it? And the answer is, I could. I could have used oils from start to finish. But there is a cost involved. Doing all that background and mixing up all that oil paint, well, it would cost a pretty penny. This way, it's a lot more cost effective. Now, the other big advantage is time. If I do my background and then start working my highlights in oils, so the whole thing is done in oils, but then I have a little mishap and one of my little happy accidents comes in, then I have to go back and try and do a repair. That might involve scraping off some of the paint. But of course that would then take all the dark underpaint off with it as well. So a quick repair suddenly becomes, well, a bit more of a headache for you. By using an acrylic as a base, it means I could do something like this, stand back and decide I don't like it, pick up a palette knife and scrape it off, retouch it with some new highlights, and the whole job is repaired in moments. It's also good if you do a background for a painting and then you think, well, I don't like the look of that. Imagine doing all that work in oils and then thinking it doesn't look very good. You'd have to scrap it all that scraping off and all that paint all wasted. Whereas if I did a background in acrylics and thought, no, I've changed my mind, I can leave it half an hour and pick up some new acrylic paint and go over it again. So the use of acrylics as an underpainting, I think, are sort of manyfold. The question I often get asked is, once I've started putting on, like this painting, some liquid clear, can I carry on using the acrylics? Well, the answer is no. Bob Ross Liquid Clear is an oil-based paint. Once you've completed the underpainting in acrylics and then started applying an oil-based paint on top, acrylics firstly won't mix very well with an oil-based paint because there's oil and water, but even if the liquid clear was left to dry completely and then you try to paint in acrylics on top, it won't bond properly. If I put acrylic on here, in time it would just flake off. So once you start on the oils, you can't go back to apply acrylics again. So make sure you've done a really good job on your acrylics first. The next few questions relate to planning and layout and some of the more technical aspects of starting a painting. For instance, do I just sort of think about something and then just paint it? Or do I sit and plan it a little bit more? What colours do I choose? What highlights do I choose? Do I use colour charts? The answer is yes to all of those things. But that's not how I started out. Like most people, I started out with only half an idea. Then one day I said to myself, I need to get myself a bit of a plan. And ever since then, I found that my paintings have improved dramatically because I know where I'm going with it. I'm not shooting in the dark all the time. I have an idea and I have a reference. And I can advise you to do the same with your own paintings. Don't just start out blindly hoping for the best. Give yourself a better chance with a bit of a plan. When it comes to my choice of colours, I do like to work from reference photographs. They give me a sense of where a painting might be travelling to and if my colours are on or off. Now, take care with this one because you can take rather a flat and interesting reference photograph, but it's got good bones, as they say. You might think, well, I don't like it as a winter scene. Maybe I want to spice it up a bit and make it look more spring-like. This is something I've done with some of Bob's work in the past. In fact, I took 3 separate Bob Ross paintings and made them into one. So your choice of colour, well, the sky's the limit. I did another video all about complementary colours. And the best way to find out where you're going to see those complementary colours working best is to use something like a colour wheel. If you don't have a colour wheel, then it's something which you should really sort of think about getting. It's incredibly useful. But I have to say that for a long time, my one sat on the shelf, sort of lonely, and I didn't really know much about how to use it. But when I found out what it was good for, well, it opened up a whole new world of colour mixing and blending. It explains cool colours and warm rich colours and which ones work best with what, which ones are complementaries. So colour wheels are incredibly useful. It means that you should never be stuck for finding a colour that matches another one. The next batch of questions I get asked quite a lot are about the techniques I'm using and about some of these effects I get when painting bushes, adding highlights. What sort of brushes am I using? How do I load them? And maybe if you think your results are very pleasing, if you're doing something wrong. So let's have a quick look at these 2 brushes. These 2 are Bob Ross 1-inch landscape brushes. And if I hold them side by side, I think you can see that, well, one of them is definitely a bit threadbare. That's just a joke for a little bit on the bald side. Yes, this brush is a lot newer. It hasn't had such a hard life, but slowly this will wear down and it will become this brush. Now, if you've seen my paintings at all, you'll know that I often use one of my old worn brushes for doing sort of the heavy work, adding dark colours and underpainting in oils. I then keep my nice soft newish brush for doing highlights. In my videos, I take great care to show you how I load these brushes. I take care to show you that they have a crimped edge to them, that they have a rounded side to them, and that I always load my brush in the same direction. I always pull it through the paint in one direction. I want my brush to adopt a nice sort of hairstyle, so that when I touch the canvas and I press, and I let the bristles splay apart, they leave a little delicate highlight. Sometimes we forget and we load the brush one way, and then sometimes we turn it around and we load it the other direction. The problem is, It's a bit like a bad hairstyle. The brush goes every which way, so when you add the highlights, they don't stay in a sort of a nice regular shape. You tend to end up firing little bits of colour everywhere. Now, this isn't such a bad thing. I quite like some of the brushes to be, well, a little unruly. Mother Nature doesn't mind if it's a little bit this way and that way. For some of my paintings, I like to use water mixable oils, like wildlife. I find they work better for my style of painting, but you could also use them for painting landscapes and seascapes. I've used them and they work really well. The only difference really is that the Bob Ross brand is mixed thin and thick. The dark colours tend to be rich and heavy, so they form a nice dark sticky underpainting, and the highlights tend to be light, thinner and oily. But you can easily take a water mixable oil paint and turn it into one of those. If you want to stiffen up your paint a little bit, I put some on a piece of cardboard, leave it sit for half an hour or so, and soak up some of the oil that's in the paint. If you want it a little thinner, then don't be tempted to use water, but buy proper water mixable linseed oil. The reason why I use a linseed oil which is water mixable is the fact that I want to use oil paints throughout my painting. They retain that lovely luster and bright colour and are thin enough so you can do those little touches of highlights. So if you're looking for an alternative brand to the Bob Ross brand, I'd say investigate water mixable oils. Now, many of you have figured out that if you take a tiny drop of linseed oil and you scrub it onto a canvas, you can then take a small amount of titanium white water mixable oil and then scrub it over the top, and it thins down liquid white just enough to make it sort of blendable, a little bit like the Bob Ross branded products. If you want to paint with a clear base, just use linseed oil on its own. It means at the end of the day you can wash your brushes with soap and water. No solvents needed. So you have a lovely finished painting. But what next? Do you varnish it or not? Well, it's very much personal preference. I know that I like to leave my paintings to sit and dry for quite some months before I make that decision. If I'm going to do anything though, I'll use something like this, which is a spray varnish. This is called a Damer varnish, and it's something which you see very often in art shops. You can shop around online for it, and it comes in gloss or semi-gloss or matte, and you have whatever you decide for your painting. If you don't want to use an aerosol spray, you can also buy this as a liquid, and that needs to be applied with just a very sort of soft fine brush, but make sure it's not one of those brushes which can lose all its bristles. You'll spend forever picking all the little bits and pieces off. The other thing that is lovely about using a varnish is that it will even out the surface of a painting. Sometimes when a painting's been finished and you look at it from a bit of an angle, you see there's some areas of sinkage. This is where the paint has dried a little faster and it's gone sort of a matte or a flat colour. Other areas will have dried with a bit more gloss. This sinking in, or sometimes called oiling in, of a painting is very common. A nice oil finish like a Damer varnish will even out that surface. The other nice thing it does is amplifies the colours. So if your painting sort of looks lovely when you finish it, and then a few months later it looks a little bit, well, a little underwhelming, give it a thin coat of a varnish spray or a brush on spray and watch those colours jump off the canvas. So that's it from the studio's first Q&A session, but I want to know what you think. Drop a comment down below if you have any more questions or you want to see another one of these Q&As in future. In the meantime, there's some more lovely videos for you to watch coming right along. What do you think? Strong silent type.